One thing to remember too is that our dogs and our cats are more exposed and more susceptible to chronic toxin exposure because of their location on the floor, so they're in amongst it, and because of their very small body size, which means that they will have relatively higher levels of toxin in their system than we will. And so that's two reasons why it's really important that we think about their environment. Dogs and cats walk on the floor, they lick their paws, cats groom themselves, which is a very common cause of toxicity. So it's a very important thing to consider is their home environment. And I guess there's a range of things in the environment that may accumulate and be toxic to dog and cats. And as you said, it's not just the environment, it's food. I guess in my mind, I often treat both as the same source of toxins. So things that people might think about are cleaning, their cleaning chemicals, and certainly things like chlorine and bleach are known to be, really irritating and can burn and cause respiratory irritation. And I guess, over time may disrupt the immune system. So it's really important to think about cleaning agents, renovating, really important one. Exposure to things like lead paint and asbestos can really be toxic. Pesticides. So thinking about things that are used outside in the garden, things that are used on the lawn, particularly weed killer. And people probably have heard about glyphosate. Glyphosate's been linked to lymphoma in people. It is actually the most common herbicide used in Australia. There certainly are studies linking herbicides to different cancers in dogs. There's a specific study that links Scotty Terriers to an increased risk of bladder cancer with exposure to herbicides, not specifically glyphosates, interestingly. And also there's an increased risk for dogs for lymphoma. So really important to consider not only in your own backyard, but also exposure in parks, on other people's nature strips. And I guess as an aside, one important preventative strategy that we often talk about is every day wiping feet, wiping the undercarriage, maybe with cats with a damp flannel, just giving them a wipe over, just to reduce the potential for them to lick it off their feet. And this also actually reduces a lot of foot irritation, foot dermatitis that we see in dogs as a result of exposure to grass residues. So herbicides are a very important consideration. I guess insecticides. We use a lot of insecticides, obviously. We live in an environment where we have to share our homes with cockroaches, ants, fleas, which can cause health issues for dogs and cats. Probably a more recent environmental toxin that we have started to talk about is the impact of synthetic fragrances. So whether that's like airwick diffusers, reed diffusers, even essential oils, especially if they're poor quality, if they're not pure oils. And a side note on oils too is we have to remember dogs and cats, their sense of smell is, I can't remember the exact number, but it's many, many times more sensitive than ours. So something that we think is quite pleasant, a little bit of lavender on an oil water diffuser. We don't recommend oil burners, but water diffusers. We find that pleasant and relaxing, could be overwhelming for a dog or a cat. So even, scents that we think are calming and therapeutic, there are ways of checking the safety and different strategies for using them. Even a lot of perfumes, a lot of perfumed like moisturizers and the impact of those. There's some evidence that they may cause what we call endocrine disruption, so leading to things like thyroid imbalances, which are potentially, illnesses we see both in dogs and cats as they get older, as well as oxidative stress. And the other thing we see in dogs and cats is respiratory irritation and coughing and asthma. So, and cigarette smoke, of course, and vape smoke. In fact, cigarette smoke, passive cigarette smoke, it has been directly linked to nasal cancer in dogs, oral squamous cell carcinoma, and other oral cancers in cats. So, absolutely something we want to avoid, any cigarette or vaping anywhere near our pets. Probably another one that maybe people are not acutely aware of is what we call mycotoxins, which are toxins that grow on molds. And so these molds may occur in crops, but they can also occur in the house. And a particular risk in our pets' environment is actually in their food, particularly dry food that is stored inappropriately. A common problem is people will open a big bag of dry food and tip it into a tin, And then they'll put another bag in there when the other one's not quite finished. And so the food at the bottom is actually accumulating over a long period of time. And mycotoxins are potentially carcinogenic, may be associated with long-term liver issues, other long-term degenerative diseases. And so strategies to reduce exposure to mycotoxins might mean thinking about diet, but also importantly, just thinking about storage, thinking about making sure the food's in date, making sure it's airtight, probably not buying a large bulk bag of food to save money, because you might actually end up, doing yourself or doing your pet a huge disservice. Fire retardants, I guess these are chemicals that are often used in nonstick cookware, in soft furnishings, in fabrics. And these are also potentially associated with what we call endocrine disruptors, but also in the human field have been linked to some types of cancer. So I don't know that they've made that link in the veterinary world at this point, but we often look to what's going on. There's a lot more research going on in the human side of things. There's a lot more money to be spent. So we're often taking our messages from what we're hearing there.